Hey. Good morning, Santa Rosa. Hey. I love the pearly gates songs and jokes, don't you? It reminded me of a story about a priest and a cab driver who arrived at the pearly gates at the same time. And the priest was told to take a seat, and the cab driver was led into heaven. And so the priest was infuriated, and he comes to St. Peter and he says, wait a minute, he says, I preached the word of the Lord for 50 years, and that man drove a cab around town at night, and he gets in and I don't? What's the story? And so St. Peter looks at his notes and he says, well, when you preached, people slept, but when he drove, people prayed. So I think anything that connects us with spirit is divine, don't you think? This morning I want to talk to you about your story. When I was growing up on the East Coast, there was a television commercial of a sort of plump guy who would start out the commercial by saying, hey Jerry, what's your story? Remember that? And then he'd give the commercial, and then at the end he would say, that's my story. And we all have our story, don't we? And there's only two questions I want to ask you about your story. One is your current story serving you? And two, are you bigger than your story? And I want to give you some anecdotes and inspiration this morning to remind you that you're bigger than your story, that you are bigger than anything that's ever happened to you. In fact, you're smarter than you've been told. We've been conditioned to believe we're stupid. Have you noticed that? I have to tell you, we saw the reviewed the video E.T. a couple nights ago, and it was like the 25th anniversary edition. And there was a line in it that I missed when I saw it 25 years ago. And Elliot, the boy who found E.T., is walking to school with his brother. And his brother says, say, have you explained school to E.T. yet? And Elliot says, how could you possibly explain school to higher intelligence? Now, school is a good thing when it's used for education. Education comes from the Latin word educare, which means to draw forth from within. Unfortunately, in many cases, it's a pounding in from without. So I want to offset any story that you have about the idea that you don't already know. Okay, I saw a wonderful meditation poster. It said, you already know how to meditate. Let me help you remember. So I want to suggest to you that anything you're concerned about, asking about, worried about, you already know. Let me show you how I learned this. Years ago, I saw one TV show in a series called Totally Hidden Video. It lasted for 6 months, but it was a good show. It was like Candid Camera. And they played one trick that got my attention in a big way. They took a FedEx driver, and they got his ID, and they used it for something I'll tell you about later. And they dispatched him to a place that was a phony temple. It was like a Hare Krishna kind of cult kind of place. And he was to deliver a package there. Now, he did not know that all the people in the sect were actors and actresses put up by this TV show. And so when he arrived, they all turned, they have their robes and their little bald heads and everything. And they turn and they start bowing. When he comes in, he goes, ooh, ah, ooh, ah. They all say, ooh, welcome, welcome, come in, ooh, 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 ooh. And they said, the leader comes and greets him and says, we've been waiting for you. And he says, yeah, I'm sorry, there was a little traffic on 101. And they say, no, no, you are the deliverer. He says, well, of course I am. Here's your package. They say, no, 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 you don't understand. Many years ago, when our founder founded our sect, he had a prophecy that there would be a great one come to deliver us and teach us. And we believe it is you. He says, no, no, come on, come on. They said, please, come, come. So they usher him into a back room where there's lots of curtains, and they open up a wall of curtains, and there is a life-size portrait of him with the hat and the robes and the beads and the whole number. And and they say, please come, teach us. And there's a big guru cushion for him in front of the room. And so he sits down, and he thinks for a minute, and he goes, you know, life is like a river. And I go, oh. He says, sometimes it's flowing rapidly, you got to hang in there. And sometimes it's kind of stagnant, you got to be patient. He says, but eventually, if you just flow, you'll reach the ocean. Pretty good stuff, huh? The kind of thing you would hear here, right? And they go, ooh, ah, ah. He says, okay, well, I got to go now. And he gets up and leaves. Now, here's the cool thing. They played this trick on 3 FedEx drivers that they showed, and each one, when he got to sit on the cushion, had something really profound to say. Which tells me that given the right conditions, anybody can be a guru. But the most important guru to be is the one to yourself, because the word guru is spelled G-U-R-U. And just parenthetically, some of you may have seen the trailers. In June, Mike Myers has a new movie coming out called The Love Guru. It's kind of a parody on Hindu gurus. And he uses that line in the movie. So he stole his line from me. But that's okay, because I stole it from somebody else. But the important thing to remember is that there's something inside you that is bigger than any current drama that's happening. There's somebody that is wiser than any current not knowing. And it's kind of funny how our knowingness comes out. I was speaking at Omega Institute a few years ago in New York, and it was morning, and I was walking to breakfast across this campus, and there was a woman sitting on a bench, and she said, excuse me, can you tell me what time it is? And I didn't have a watch, but I took a guess, and I said, I think it's about 9:45. And she said, oh no, it was 9:45 about half an hour ago. And I started saying, then why'd you ask me? Well, maybe she wanted confirmation, huh? But there was something inside her that knew what time it was. And that's why I learned in graduate school that the definition of a consultant is somebody who borrows your watch to tell you what time it is. So, is your story working for you? I have found that lots of people tend to argue for their small story. Have you noticed this? That I do lots of coaching and counseling, and I'm amazed at how many people cling tenaciously to being right about what's wrong. See? And I'll say to them, well, let's look at it like this. And they'll go, well, yes, but. And I'll say, well, this happened to me, and here's what I did with it. And they go, yes, but. And I'll say, let's pray about it. They go, yes, but. So then I kick them in the yes, but. In fact, one of my programs is called Reducing the Size of Your Butt. I don't know why, but there's a part of the human psyche that finds safety in being small. Have you noticed that? It's almost like your story gives you some kind of points or payoff. Maybe you have a victim story, or a being right story, or being wronged story. I went out with somebody once who on our first date, she said, you know, every man I've ever been with has left me. Well, so did I. It was a setup. That's why I tell people, please, 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 whatever you do, do not on your first date explain to your date why your marriages have failed. Uh-oh. Another one bites the light. Because you see, will the usher please come take this lady away, please? No, you're welcome. What if you began to argue for your possibilities rather than your limits? You see, you have two lawyers in your head. I know it's not a pleasant notion, but you have two lawyers in your, even lawyers will agree with me on this, and one is arguing for your possibilities and one is arguing for your limits. You all understand what I'm talking about. Now, who will win? The one that you pay the most. But the way that you pay these two lawyers is not with cash, it's with your attention. Because attention is intention, and fascination is fertilizer. See, whatever you're fascinated with grows. Whatever you pay attention to, you get more of. So, watch the words that come out of your mouth, because your words are creative. And anything that you fill in the words, fill in the blank, I am with, gets to be. You see, I'll tell you a cute story about this. This is a story about faith and action. It's about a bigger story that supersedes a smaller story. Many years ago, I went with a couple buddies to New York City from New Jersey, and we were coming back to Port Authority, the bus station, to get a bus back to New Jersey. And we're kind of late, and so we're hustling. And there were 3 or 4 of us. And one guy said, I'll go get the tickets, and you run up to the platform because the bus is leaving now. So we ran up, and sure enough, the bus was just about to pull out, and we hailed the driver, and he let us in. And we said, our buddy's coming with our tickets. He said, all right. So we're waiting, and he was delayed. And so the bus driver finally says, sorry, guys, I got to leave. And one of our guys said, hey, wait a minute, he's coming right off the escalator now. And the bus driver said, well, fine. So the guy comes on the bus, and he gives the tickets, and we all go to sit down in the back, and one of our guys said to him, the fellow who called to the bus driver, sure, I'm glad you saw him before he got off when he got off the escalator. The guy said, oh, I didn't see him, I was just saying that. So his faith was big enough to keep the ball rolling. You understand? You understand? He created a bigger story. Some of you are familiar with the Abraham Hicks materials. It's wonderful stuff. I'm into it myself. And Jerry Hicks, the husband of Esther, tells a great story. He said that years ago he went fishing with a friend on this lake, and they rented a boat and went out in the lake, and they caught a ton of fish, so many fish that the boat was almost sinking by the time they came back to the dock. And as they got back, the guy who rented the boat said, where'd you get all these fish? He said, well, right over there. He said, you know, there's been no fish in this lake all summer. Nobody's caught any. And they said, oh, we didn't know that. So they knew there were fish there, and they found some. You understand how the game works? You see, mind is everything. At this very moment, you are creating your life with your thoughts. This is what this whole center is about. That thought is creative. Nothing happens without a thought springing before it. So if you want to know previews of coming attractions, look at today's thoughts. You understand? And what you think is reality is quite liquid. You understand? Reality is not solid. In fact, Deepak Chopra and lots of quantum physicists explain to us that there is more space between electrons and protons and stuff in the atom than there is between planets in our solar system. That it's all quite malleable. Let's do an example. I want you all to raise your finger and go clockwise. Okay? And now keep moving clockwise and slowly lower your hand and your finger until your finger is now about chest height. And now what direction is it going now? Another 300, bite the light. So is your finger going clockwise or is it going counterclockwise? Well, it all depends on where you're looking at it from. And that's, you know, That's how Jesus did his healings. That's how anybody does their healings. Well, if you want to heal somebody, you hold the vision of perfection while they're holding their vision of imperfection. And if your vision of perfection and wholeness is strong enough and big enough, they will elevate to your vision. However, if their vision of imperfection is stronger than your vision of perfection, you will sink to their imperfection. That's why if you do any kind of healing or counseling or mothering or teaching and you're burnt out at the end, it's because you've allowed the vibration of imperfection to be stronger than you're holding the vision of perfection. And so your only homework is to go home and get back into your vision. Great metaphysician Joel Goldsmith, many of you have read his works. He lived in the first half of the 20th century. He had a healing practice where he would have a little prayer room off to the side of his living room, and people would come into his living room and just sit there, and he knew nothing about them, knew nothing about their disease, nothing about anything, and he would just sit and know their wholeness of whoever was sitting there. And his prayer and his intention and his knowingness of their wholeness was so strong that they would walk out healed no matter what was wrong with them. So it's not so important to know what's wrong, it's more important to know what's right. And that's why I think it's happening in this service and many religious science churches, centers. Somebody sits and holds the space. Somebody will just sit in the room and meditate and hold the space, no matter whether we're laughing or crying or things are working or not working. Somebody's holding the space. So that's what you have to be. You have to be a space holder during these times. Now, especially times when things are scary. I mean, people talking about recession and wars and blah, 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 on and on. So you need to be part of the consciousness that lifts above that to the bigger story. In fact, people talk about recession and hard times. Do you know that the two greatest architectural achievements of the 20th century were created during the height of the Great Depression? The Empire State Building and the Golden Gate Bridge. Both were funded around 1929 and erected. The Empire State Building went up around 33 and the bridge around 36 or 37. Now, where do people find that money? In New York, it was private financing, and in Marin, they floated a bond. So where did that money come from if there was no money around? You see, but there were people living at that time who had a bigger vision than the masses, and they were the ones who manifested. You understand? So that's who you must be now, because otherwise you're just part of the going down the tailspin syndrome. And that's the value of coming here on a Sunday morning. You get pumped up, you get excited. You remember what you knew before you forgot. Somebody once said, we started out fine, and then we got defined. And now we're getting refined. That's what you're doing here. In a moment, I want to just share with you one more vision. We're doing a workshop this afternoon called How Good Can You Stand It? And what we'll do from 2 to 4 is I'm going to demonstrate to you how the limits that you live in are basically illusory. And that you have every power right now with your stand, right now with your weight, with your age, with your financial status, with your marital status, whatever's going on in your body or anywhere, that you have the power to go to the next level. And it'll be a fun workshop, it'll be empowering. We're going to create a space of remembrance. And I promise you will walk out knowing and remembering more than you did when you walked in. A money back guarantee. If you don't feel better when you walk out, when you walked in, you get your money back. But nobody ever asks for the money back because it works. It always works. So it'll be 2 to 4. And I'll be happy to sign books outside afterwards. I think we sold out of most of them, but we're taking orders, and I'll sign it and send it back to you if you like. So let me close with this, this wonderful story. There's a story about a king in a tropical land who had a lieutenant who was very positive. In fact, this lieutenant was so positive that he was kind of annoying. Do you know anybody like that? Are you like that? Stop it. Be a little negative. You have more friends. Just kidding. Anyway, so this king had this lieutenant. The lieutenant was always finding good in everything, even when the king didn't. And so they're out in the jungle one day, and the king is chopping a coconut. And he misses his aim, and he accidentally chops his big toe off. Very compassionate group, thank you. And the lieutenant says, wow, that's cool. The king says, what are you talking about? The lieutenant says, there must be something good in this. The king says, are you crazy? The lieutenant says, no, there's always a miracle if you just look for it. Well, that annoyed the king to no end. And so he picked the lieutenant up and he hurled him bodily into a dry well. And he left him to die. Well, the king hobbles through the jungle and he's apprehended by a band of wild headhunters who decide that the king would make a fitting sacrifice to this month's volcano offering. So they take him to the priest, and the priest is putting the robes on and the ointments and all sacred rituals. And he looks down, he sees the king has a toe missing. And the shaman throws his hands up and he goes, well, I'm sorry, we can't use you for the sacrifice. It has to be a full-bodied sacrifice. You're free to go. The king says, hallelujah, I'm out of here. And so he hobbles out of the camp, and he remembers, oh my God, the lieutenant said there was going to be a miracle here. And I didn't see it. How could I have left him to die? That was horrible. Let me go back and see if I can find him. So the king finds his way back to the hole, and sure enough, the lieutenant's sitting there whistling happily, because comes to the Center for Spiritual Living, and the king leans over and he pulls him out and he dusts him off and he says, I'm so sorry. He said, how could I do this to you? You said there would be something good out of this and I didn't believe it, and I left you, and these cannibals took me and they were going to throw me into the volcano, but they decided I didn't have a full body, so they freed me, and you called it, and I'm so sorry. The lieutenant says, no apology necessary. The king says, why? He says, because there was also a miracle that you threw me in the pit. And the king says, well, how is that a miracle? And the lieutenant says, well, because if I was with you, they would have taken me for the sacrifice. It's been great to be with you. Thank you very much.